Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto blocked Sasuke's curse mark. Mid-Chuunin exams on. Orochimaru fails to seal the Kyuubi's chakra in the Forest of Death. Naruto interferes with Sasuke's curse mark. And what's wrong with the Hokage? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 5. Broken Clan. The Yondaime unhappily trekked out of the tower and out into the village. Normally a nice walk every now and then was a refreshing change of pace, a break from the bureaucracy and politicking. But in this particular instance, he had a little unpleasant errand to run. When he reached the onsen, it wasn't hard to locate his target. The white-haired man was crouched in the shade by the fence, and clearly peering in through a knothole at the bathing women beyond. He would have liked to alert the poor women to his presence, but unfortunately the Hokage needed to have some questions answered, and that couldn't happen if Jiraiya was being cursed at and chased off. "Jiraiya-sama," he muttered. "I received multiple complaints about a giant, rampaging toad on the outskirts of the village yesterday." "Care to explain that?" "I didn't summon him," the Sannin answered innocently. "Well, neither did I," the Hokage scowled. "And according to you, you and I are the only ones able to summon toads. So how did the toad get here?" Yes, we were the only ones able to call upon the Toad clan," Jiraiya nodded. "Now there is a third summoner. Gamabunta was testing him out." "A third?" The Yondaime blinked. "Who did you let sign the contract?" "That prospective student I mentioned before," the lecher grinned. "He didn't pass, unfortunately, but damn did he get close. If he'd held on for 5 more minutes, he would have done it." He shrugged. "Oh well, he'll get it next time for sure." "Who is this kid?" The blonde shinobi frowned. "You never mentioned a name." "Uzumaki Naruto, of course." The older man grinned widely. Then his smile faltered for a moment. "Little brat tricked me into it, actually." His smile speedily returned. "But it's all worked out. Been rather fun, really. Worthy students are just so hard to find." The Hokage barely heard everything else that came after Naruto's name. His first instinct was to separate Jiraiya from the boy to keep Naruto clear of the Sannin's undesirable habits. But he sat on that impulse and held his tongue. It had been 2 weeks since Naruto had started training under this man. He only had 2 weeks left until the third and final phase of the exam. Even if he had an appropriate ninja to spare as a replacement trainer, it was silly to change teachers at this point. And if Naruto wanted to study under Jiraiya? "Naruto tricked you into teaching him?" the Yondaime asked. Jiraiya sighed. "Brat got me to promise to help him." He pouted and muttered something that sounded like, "sneaky little bastard," but the Yondaime couldn't be sure. "But like I said, it's all worked out." "Is his mother aware that you are his tutor?" the Hokage inquired dubiously. "Of course." The Sannin huffed. "I met with her right after the first day. I know better than to cross that woman." He shivered. "Only Tsunadeheim is scarier." The blonde man blinked. "You know Kushina-san?" "Sure." The lecher paused, then put his little notebook into his pocket and strolled leisurely away from the bathhouse fence. "She was a friend of yours, back in the day." The Yondaime nearly tripped as he hurried to follow. "What?" "You two first met when you were only genin," the Sannin cheerfully explained. "She was a tomboy back then, dressed like a boy, acted like a boy, wore her hair short like a boy. I guess you thought that she was a boy and she got all offended and punched you in the face and broke your nose." "What?" The idea that he'd insulted her, even if inadvertently, made him cringe. "No worries," the older man laughed. "She's forgiven you since then. She wouldn't work so hard for you if she hadn't." Forgive and forget, and in your case, you really forgot. That's not funny, the Hokage snapped. He sighed and jammed his hands into his pockets. Why didn't you mention her before? Her name never came up once when you were reminding me who all my friends were. I never claimed to be perfect or infallible, Jiraiya sniffed. She slipped my mind. And it didn't help any that she laid low for the entire period between you coming back as an amnesiac and the Kyuubi's advance on the village. I didn't see her, so I didn't remember her, so I didn't mention her. The younger man grew pensive. She never said anything to me. You would have to ask her about that, the Sannin shrugged. He turned to his former student and was suddenly dead serious. She's a good girl. I'm glad that she's found her way to your side. You can trust her with anything. Jiraiya's serious and sincere endorsement of his assistant thoroughly swept away the few struggling seeds of doubt that Danzo and various others constantly sought to plant in his mind about her. He didn't care for the Sannin personally, but his advice, accepting romantic advice, was always sound and honest. The young Hokage had no doubt that Jiraiya meant every bit of what he said about her, and he was almost certainly right, especially since Kakashi also seemed to trust her without complaint or question. All right, the yondaime nodded. Not to interfere with your training of Naruto, but could you please avoid summoning large toads and causing such havoc for the time being? Certainly, the Sannin agreed. A second attempt at Gamabunta's test can wait until after the exams. Once he recovers from that little romp yesterday, I'll see what his elemental affinity is and we'll go on from there. Thank you, the Hokage sighed and shifted his direction back towards the tower. Have fun with your paperwork. Jiraiya called after him. The blonde shinobi was too distracted to respond. Why didn't she say anything? Kushina fiddled with the coffee machine in the Jounin lounge with a scowl on her face. The next time she ran into Jiraiya, she was going to stomp on his foot as hard as she could. She really hated being right sometimes. Jiraiya laughs off my worries about Naruto and summoning, and what happens? Naruto turns up at the frigging hospital, that's what. She savagely stirred in a sugar cube and one of those little creamer things. Normally it only takes Naruto a good night's sleep to bounce back from chakra exhaustion, but I went to see him first thing today and he's still out cold. Maybe she'd give Jiraiya a knee to the groin, too. Snorting angrily, she grabbed the coffee-filled styrofoam cup and headed for the Hokage's office. He'd gone out for some reason just before she'd made it to the tower from the hospital. When he came back, he'd find his coffee waiting for him on his desk and know that she was on the job. But just after she placed the steaming cup on his desk and turned to leave, he trudged through the office doors. He looked so deep in troubled thought that at first he didn't notice her. It was only after he'd sat down in his chair and noticed the coffee that he looked up to see her standing near his desk and watching him. He swallowed hard and dropped his gaze to his coffee. Good morning. Morning. She frowned at his rather despondent mood. What's wrong? I went to talk to Jiraiya-sama, he answered hesitantly. There were some complaints about a large toad. I'll bet. Did something upsetting come up? He mentioned knowing you. The Hokage timidly glanced at her. He said that I knew you before. That's it, he's totally getting kneed in the crotch. Yes? You knew a lot of people before. What makes me any different? You never said anything, he answered with a wounded look. Jiraiya-sama said that you were my friend, but you never said a word about it. Jiraiya, I am going to castrate you. With your memory the way it is, it's like you started over completely fresh. I decided to approach you as a stranger and start over. She tucked some loose hair behind her ear. It seemed easier. Do you really enjoy simply being told that you know someone and should trust them when you have no memory of them or feeling for them? Isn't it better to get to know someone and come to trust them yourself? I suppose so, he reluctantly agreed. But I would have liked to know, at some point. Well, now you know, she smiled faintly. And isn't it at least a little better this way now that you know me and you've decided that you like me? The yondaime started in surprise, and then dropped his eyes away from her as his face flushed a light pink. Kushina blinked. Sometimes, the Hokage would grow uncomfortable or become shy. She couldn't always pinpoint the cause, but it usually happened when he was confronted by his female admirers. Whenever she saw it happen, it made her think of a timid little schoolboy, not a powerful shinobi and respected village leader. And at this particular moment, he seemed very much the timid little schoolboy, with a crush. A startled, desperate hope surged up to choke her. It had seemed like such a fluke that Minato had developed a more than friendly interest in her, that when it became clear that his memory would never return, she had entertained no real hope that he could possibly become attracted to her again. After all, she wasn't terribly feminine, she wasn't really pretty, there were so many more women more desirable than she was. And yet... Stop it. She thought viciously. Stop it, stop it, stop it. It was stupid to think about such things. It was dangerous. She could not afford to be the reckless kunoichi that she had once been. He could just be embarrassed by her wording, by the insinuation that he particularly cared for her. Any expression of romantic interest made him uncomfortable. It was probably worse coming from a woman so close to him, one he trusted to not pursue him as the majority of the female population did. And if he actually did harbor some attraction to her, it was a crush. An infatuation. A strong admiration. It was not love. Should she dare to try and reclaim even a glimmer of what once was, her enemies would seek to use it against her. There were several people, not just Danzu, he was just the most vocal, who did not like her close relationship with the Hokage. They would happily churn out rumors and stir up as much scandal as they could to remove her from the yondaime's side. And now was simply not the time. The Hokage could not be afford to be distracted by something so silly when the exams were going on, and neither could she. With tension so high, with threats so real and close, everything else simply had to wait. The safety of the village overshadowed all else. Why yes, he managed at last, pulling her from her musings. It is a little better. He gave her a shy, innocent smile. Thank you. And he was innocent as a child. He had no memory of kissing or sexual intimacy. He had no memory of going out on missions or killing men with his own hands. Sure, women made all sorts of racy propositions to him, sure, he sent men to kill and be killed. But it was not the same as directly doing these things. In many ways, he was more innocent than her own genin son. She managed a bright, cheery smile. You're very welcome, Hokage-sama. Now why don't you enjoy your coffee while I could make sure that the decryption department isn't having a paper airplane contest again? All right, he laughed and waved her off, dismissing her. Kushina turned and left, keeping the happy expression on her face, until she was safely out the door. The life of a ninja is one of sacrifice, she reminded herself as she went about her rounds of keeping the various paper-pushing departments in line. For my son, for my Hokage, for my village I will sacrifice anything. My heart does not matter. When she was gone, he sipped at his coffee and sighed. Now I understand how she can make such great coffee. If she knew me before, she would know how I liked to drink it. He felt warm, and his drink had nothing to do with it. Even though she had only been teasing him about liking her, it had stirred up the secret longing in him that he buried and denied. And no matter how he tried to rebury his desire, it would not go. I think that I am in love with my assistant, he admitted to himself, torn between misery and despair, and warm electric excitement. In the beginning, she was simply a relief. All his previous, and very short-lived, assistants had practically worshipped him. The female assistants had been the worst, more interested in trying to date him than help him manage things. But Kushina-san had been different. She respected him, but she didn't treat him as if he was made of glass or revere the ground he walked on. If she thought he was being silly, she would tell him so, sometimes she'd even hit him, gently. He was the Hokage, but he was not some god far above her. She treated him like a person. It was only after years of working with her and after becoming rather attached to her son that his gratitude deepened into something else. The shift inside him had been so subtle that it wasn't until he'd caught himself daydreaming about kissing her and seriously contemplating what it would feel like that he'd noticed it. Frightened and uncertain, he'd found as many reasons as he could to not try anything with her. He was her boss, her superior. It didn't seem appropriate to date her. People like Danza certainly didn't seem to approve her even working for him in the first place. And as he was her boss, she might feel obligated to give him what he wanted regardless of her own feelings. She had a son, which meant that she had had a relationship with a man. It wasn't his business. The activities that led to a child were solely the business of the man and woman involved, so he didn't ask. As he'd never seen her with any man, he could only assume that he was gone. Whether it was through an ended relationship or death, he had no clue. Because this mysterious liaison had produced a child, he was certain that the relationship had been a strong, romantic one. And so, what right did he have to try and replace Naruto's father in her heart? And there was that ring he had. What if there was some other woman out there, waiting for him to remember her? What if one of the ladies that Jiraiya and Kakashi had turned away as a fraud was actually genuine? Should he just abandon that girl to chase someone new? For a moment, he hesitantly considered the idea that the Sannin had insinuated that Naruto was his son. He and the boy did look strikingly similar. And if she had failed to ever tell them that they had known each other previously, then she wouldn't have told him this either. The Hokage groaned and rested the side of his face on the cool wood of his desk. Should I really be thinking about this? I'm only confusing myself. And he was starting to get a headache. Hokage-sama? He sat up to find one of the Chuunin that was on an administrative rotation peering at him with concern as the young man deposited more paperwork on the desk. I'm all right, he smiled weakly. Just a little headache. The Chuunin nodded and left the office. The yondaime stared at the stack of papers and sighed. I can't be thinking about this now, I have work to do. There are exams to oversee, this new Odo group to figure out, Orochimaru is around, and Suna seems to be up to something. Real trouble, is imminent. I need to focus on this. Everything else can wait. I will have more than enough time to figure out my own problems after the exams. Uchiha Mikoto knelt on her kitchen floor and scrubbed at some stubborn stains. She tried not to think about bloodstains or how long and gruesome it had been to clean up the Uchiha district afterwards. Of course, she failed, but that didn't keep her from trying. She shouldn't be alive. Her murderous firstborn had slaughtered all Uchiha who were either male, ninja, or had activated the Sharingan. Being a woman, she was protected from the first condition, but she had been an active and powerful ninja before marrying, and she had activated the clan Kekkai Genkai. Because of her eyes, Itachi should have killed her too along with all the others. Yet he'd left her alive. Itachi had attacked her that bloody night. Her elder son had cut up her leg badly enough that she still limped from it. And then, after killing her husband in front of her, Itachi had knocked her out cold. But he'd left her alive. If she hadn't had Sasuke, she probably wouldn't have stayed that way. The guilt was so strong that she could physically feel it choking her. The sharp blades of her old kunai called to her, offered to end it all. So much guilt. Why Fugaku? She wondered miserably. Why did you have to be so ambitious? Ambitious. You've destroyed us. When Itachi reaped his slaughter, the reason he'd left with the survivors was that he wished to test his abilities. He wished to see if there was any true challenge in the ninja of the clan. He wished to see if his Sharingan was the strongest. Mikoto knew that it was a lie. Ever since Itachi had entered into the ANBU, he had been drifting away from the clan. He increasingly chose duty over spending time with his family. The only Uchiha he continued to spend time with were Shisui, Sasuke, and his girlfriend, Moro. 2 months before the massacre, it got worse. Itachi had learned of the clan's ambitions and disagreed with them. He had argued against it, but had been ignored. I should have supported Itachi, she swallowed. I should have tried to talk Fugaku out of it. The clan should have never seriously contemplated deposing Yondaime-sama. The Uchiha clan had never been happy about the Yondaime's appointment after the sealing of the demon and the death of the Sandaime. Namikaze-san was still skilled and physically powerful, but his amnesia made him soft and easily influenced. The man shied away from violence and he made the Leaf Village appear weak. After the sealing, he left the demon host with its mother, a foreign woman who had once been a foreign kunoichi. The Uchiha demanded the child's death. The Kyuubi was simply too dangerous to be left alive, no matter how strong the seals or how strong the child. And if it were to be let live, it should not be raised by a foreigner. Only a loyal ninja of the leaf could be entrusted with raising such a thing. But their demands were ignored. The Yondaime made a treaty with Suna, one of the 5 great villages. Normally, Konoha would only make treaties with smaller, weaker villages. An alliance with one of the other great villages was dangerous, and sent a message of weakness to the other 3. When Kyuumo tried to abduct the Hyuga heiress and steal the power of the Byakugan, he chose to placate them for the killing of the abductor instead of returning to war. The Yondaime accepted the sacrifice of Hayashi's twin. And in doing so, the Uchiha clan felt that their Hokage was saying that Konoha would not fight if it was wronged. And so, the Uchiha had determined to replace the mental cripple and make the village a power to be reckoned with once again. Political maneuverings hadn't achieved the desired effect. Too many wanted the Yondaime to remain in power in the hopes that they could push their agendas through him because of his mental disability. So, the path of the coup became the primary option. The clan didn't think the Hokage would be able to stop it if he learned of it. He would only voice protests, he would take no deadly action until it was too late. But they had been wrong. It probably wasn't the Yondaime's plan. He had most likely been persuaded by Danzo and his allies to proactively eliminate the threat to avoid a bloody civil war. Although one thing simply didn't fit. Danzo is an unforgiving militarist, she frowned and paused in her scrubbing. He would spare no one. He would see us all as irredeemable traitors and demand our annihilation. And yet, some were spared. Someone had called for mercy or moderation. Someone had argued for the children, the women, and the elderly, those most likely to be innocent or ignorant of the conspiracy. Someone had given the Yondaime the strength to choose a slightly different path. There was no way that the man had done so without support of some kind. But who? Mikoto wondered. Who does the clan owe its survival to? It would probably remain a mystery forever. She couldn't ask around about it, because officially Itachi had snapped and slaughtered his own people. And Mikoto didn't dare reveal the actual truth, not even to the children of her own clan who were unaware. If she spoke of the true reason for Itachi's killing spree, she would have to admit the crime of her clan. She would have to admit that the Uchiha clan was disloyal and had been ready to attempt treason. Doing so would destroy the clan's honor, and so she and the rest of the clan, such as it was, remained silent and cowered shamefully behind the tragic lie. Some of the old women grumble that we should tell part of the truth, accused the Hokage of murdering us, though Itachi, his ANBU tool. She shook her head and returned to scrubbing the floors with her rag. And some suggest that I pursue the Hokage so that I can influence him. But I shall do neither. I am head of the Uchiha clan now. My word is law. And we shall rebuild ourselves and be loyal as we should have been. Fugaku, my poor, ambitious, foolish husband. Bitter, salty tears leaked from her dark eyes. You have destroyed us. And for what? So that you could become Godaime Hokage and save the village? I should not have been the good wife. Chapter 6. Broken Girl. Naruto groggily cracked open his eyes and stared up at the ceiling. It wasn't the ceiling of his bedroom. It was the tile ceiling of the hospital. Ah man, he groaned and scrubbed at his face. Did I really get banged up enough to have to come here? He didn't think so, but maybe he'd landed funny when he'd passed out and fallen off the giant toad's head. Crud, I didn't pass. Gnashing his teeth, he sat up and stretched. That's what I get for prematurely celebrating. Bah! Just as he was getting out of bed to look for his clothes, he was hit with a stab of hunger. He was always extra hungry after burning off all his chakra, but this was worse. It felt like he hadn't eaten in days, but that was silly. It never took him more than a day or two to recharge unless he really got hurt. Find clothes, find food, get back to training. Nodding to himself, he slipped off the bed and started to get dressed. That's the plan. And after that, kicked Niji's butt. Once he was fully dressed, Naruto jogged from the room and went to sign himself out. Now that he was a genin, he was considered an adult and could do things like check himself out of the hospital. It was a good thing, too. He didn't have time to wait around for his mom to come and check on him, find him awake, and sign him out. But halfway to the ground floor reception desk and freedom, he got distracted. Hinata? The girl was dressed in a hospital-issue nightgown and bathrobe. She looked exceptionally pale and fragile as she shuffled down the hall and braced one hand against the wall as she went. She looked like a dark little ghost. Upon hearing his voice, she stiffened up and turned to gawk at him. "You okay?" he asked. While she looked a heck of a lot better than she had the last time he'd seen her, she still didn't look so good. Should she really be out of bed? It was hard for him to tell. His rate of healing was far different than normal people. Yes, she managed softly, dropping her pale eyes to the floor and fidgeting with her fingers. You sure? Naruto frowned. Hinata nodded. I feel much better. Well, that's good, he sighed, trying to forget how all that blood had come out of her mouth. I'll be released as soon, she added meekly. Awesome. Naruto cheered. You'll be at the finals, right? The Hyuga girl nodded. All right. He grinned. Hinata timidly glanced up at him for a second, her pale cheeks a feverish shade. Shinoku and SS said, he has said, that YUPP promised to beat Niji up for you? He finished for her when her voice trailed off into soft incoherence. Yeah, he nodded firmly. He needs to be taught a lesson. Family should never fight that way. Even my mom thinks so. WWY. She was fidgeting so badly that Naruto was surprised that her fingers hadn't fallen off. Why would you help me? Naruto blinked. Why not? You're a nice girl, Hinata. There's no way you could have done anything to deserve what he did. He titled his head curiously. What's he so mad at the rest of your family for anyway? WWL. Information was more valuable than treasure in the ninja world, his mother taught him. Anything he couldn't get on Niji, even if it was just his twisted motivations, was important. With Hinata's voice getting quieter and quieter, Naruto came right up to her face so that he could hear her better. And Naruto Keikuin? She yelped and her face reddened further. You feelin' okay, Hinata? Naruto frowned and pressed his hand against her forehead to check her temperature. Do you have a fever? The girl let out a wheezy gasp and shortly crumpled to the floor. Hinata? The Yandame Hokage stared out his office windows and massaged his throbbing temples. There was a dark cloud hovering over his village and he couldn't dispel it. His only consolation, as weak as it was that only the older, higher-level ninja were aware of it. The rest of the village went about its business in blissful ignorance. Hosting the Chuunin exams was bad enough, but 3 additional factors conspired to turn the already stressful exams into a complete nightmare. Firstly, there was Oto. A new ninja group was always a cause for concern. Who were they? What were their goals and intentions? How strong were they? What did they specialize in? Were they ultimately ally or enemy? Secondly, there was Orochimaru. He vaguely recalled the rogue Sannin from his earliest days after the loss of his memory. The snake-like man always gave him the shivers, and he had never really understood why so many people had seemed to trust him and think so highly of him. When the serpent revealed his true self, the future Yondaime had only felt shock upon seeing the man's handiwork. And now it seemed that the ruthless enemy that the Sandaime had banished had returned, intent on the Sharingan and something else. And thirdly, it seemed that Suna, Konoha's supposed ally, was up to something. Suna hadn't entered as many teams as they had in previous years, and the one team who had succeeded was powerful. The Yondaime Kazekage's children had made it through the first 2 parts of the exams with minimal difficulties, and the youngest. There was simply something disturbingly wrong with Sabaku no Gaara. His advisors Danzu, Hamura, Koharu, Jiraiya, Kakashi, Ibiki, and even Kushina agreed that entering a genin such as Gaara was ominous at the very least. Please let them be wrong, he sighed. Please let them be jumping at shadows. Please, please, please. Oh, why the hell did I take this job? The short answer was, Jiraiya had talked him into it. The list of people qualified to be Hokage is short, the Sannin had told him then, as he'd worked to sway his amnesiac student into going along with things. The list of people who would actually be good at it is even shorter. The clan heads already have more than enough responsibilities, especially the Uchiha, as they also manage the military police. The Sandaime's advisors are advisors and not leaders for a reason. Orochimaru, well, he goes without saying. Tsunadeheim, her will of fire has burned out. And as for myself, he'd laughed. As much as I love this village, I'd probably only end up ruining it. But you, Minato. You are patient, intelligent, and dedicated, it's in your nature. You are strong and skilled and your reputation is fearsome. Foreign leaders will think twice and think twice again before messing with you. Sure, the memory thing is a problem, but we will help you. With some coaching and advice, you'll do just fine, I know it. By becoming the Yondaime, you will protect the village and all the people living in it, ninja and civilian alike. You are our best hope. And then Jiraiya had clinched it with, and as Hokage, you will decide the fate of that poor baby. While the Sandaime had left instructions concerning the demon's infant jailer, the village council had been leaning towards disregarding them completely. Sarutobi-sama wished for the child to live and be respected for his sacrifice. The council wanted him to be killed and forgotten to end the threat of the demon's return forever. The village's safety and future were on the line, and the life of an innocent baby hung in the balance, and so he had agreed. It was a miracle that his ascension to Hokage had been confirmed by the council. The Uchiha clan openly disdained his nomination. The Hyuga were openly dubious. And all the other clans were clearly uneasy. But when the votes were cast, he somehow came out the winner. It was desperation, he knew now. They were desperate for a leader, even one like me who was barely better than a figurehead. With me as Hokage, Konoha would look strong because no one outside the village knew that there was anything wrong with me. And there were officials, mostly civilian, who wanted a confused person like me in charge so that they could try and get more influence through me. Kakashi and Jiraiya tried to keep the political vultures and spiders at bay, but they couldn't be around all the time. Jiraiya was a master spy, and in order to do his primary job and keep the village safe, he had to be gone often and for long stretches of time. Kakashi being in ANBU gave him a good excuse to always be at the Hokage's side as a bodyguard, but sometimes he was needed for other missions. And when both were away, the Yondaime knew that little shady things would slip past him. But then she had come into his life. He'd been taking a break and walking through the village when he came across an adorable blonde-haired boy running through the streets and giggling madly. The child's mother caught up with the boy right in front of the Hokage, and the woman cheerfully introduced her baby to the village leader. While he felt like he knew no one, everyone seemed to know him. Belatedly, he saw the whisker marks and realized that the boy was the fox's prison. Naruto-chan, this man is the Yandame Hokage, the strongest ninja in the whole village. Can you say hello to Hokage-sama? Hi Yanwai-sama. I'm Naruto. From that adorable little greeting on, the blue-eyed boy stole a tiny piece of the Hokage's heart and held on to it tight. Charmed by Naruto and curious as to how he was doing, the Yandame struck up a conversation with his red-haired mother. She'd seemed uneasy with his attention, but the woman satiated his curiosity as best as she could. And then she'd hesitantly approached him with a problem. She was a kunoichi and her maternity leave was nearly expired. Because of Naruto's unique situation, she drew a small stipend to help care for him, but it wasn't enough. Even with the salary she drew as a kunoichi, money was still tight most months. When her leave was through, she would either have to return to full duty as a kunoichi and be dependent on babysitters as well as risk going on a mission and never coming home, or she would have to retire and find a civilian job. She wasn't asking for a larger stipend, she was hoping for a part-time administrative job. And so, she became one of his assistants, part-time. However, it quickly became full-time as most of his other assistants just kept on not working out. No one wanted to watch the demon brat, so his red-haired mother could never find a steady, reliable babysitter. Eventually she ended up just bringing Naruto to the tower every day and leaving him in the care of whatever ninjas were available while she worked all day. This irritated a lot of people, but the Yandame didn't really mind. He enjoyed playing with the boy whenever he could get away with it. Uzumaki Kushina really earned her place at his side about a year later. A bloody border dispute with Kumogakure no Sato had finally ended and Kumo had sent a powerful ninja as an envoy to sign the treaty to end the fighting. But in the night the man tried to kidnap the Hyuga heir and was killed. Kumo denied the man's actions and demanded retribution or the fighting would resume. The Hyuga were ready to throw the clan head's twin brother away. The Yandame found himself paralyzed with indecision because both options were unbearable. From what I understand, Hizashi wants to sacrifice himself to save his brother, not out of duty to the clan or the village, but as a brother saving his brother. Will you grant him his wish? Or will you risk many lives to prevent this one sacrificed life? It wasn't fair, but she reminded him of the bigger picture and helped him make his choice. She put up with him as he brooded for weeks afterward and managed to jar him out of his funk, mainly by leaving Naruto with him as much as possible. And from then on, she became his primary assistant and unofficial advisor. What would I do without her? He wondered idly. I'd agonize over silly things and never make up my mind on the important things. It would be a disaster. He smiled. I'm so glad that she's with me. And how did this happen again? The Hokage blinked and turned away from his office windows to see his dear assistant coming through the door with his lunch, sushi, her lunch, ramen, and Naruto trailing after her. I dunno. Naruto pouted. I was trying to talk to her, and then she just fell over and all the hospital people got mad at me. What happened? Naruto made Hyuga Hinata faint somehow. Kushina sighed and handed him his sushi. And that made the hospital staff freak out, so he had to send a shadow clone to get me to get him out of there. She rolled her eyes and started eating her noodles. Idiots. Oh, he nodded and pulled his sushi out of the takeout bag. How did you make her faint? I don't know. Naruto wailed and plopped down on the floor to devour his own boxes of Ichiraku ramen. All I was doing was talking to her, and then her face got red and she fell down. The Yandame frowned, baffled. Weird. Yeah, I know, Naruto sulked between mouthfuls of noodles. Kushina mumbled thoughtfully as she chewed. Ha. Well, Naruto, you ready to get back to training? The boy nodded eagerly, noodles hanging from his mouth. Good, she smiled. You were in the hospital so long I was starting to worry that you were going to sleep until the finals. Naruto paused in his inhaling of his ramen. Ha? How long was I asleep? 5 days. 5 days? Did you really have to scream? The yandere muttered and rubbed at his ear. Why didn't anyone wake me up? Naruto yelled and tried to shovel down his food twice as fast. You obviously needed the rest, his mother frowned and bopped him on the head. Slow down and chew your food. It would be a real shame if you choked to death before the finals. Half panicked, Naruto cringed but did as he was told. There was a stretch of several minutes of silent eating before Kushina voiced an observation. You're really into keeping this promise, aren't you? Of course, I am. Naruto huffed. You heard what that jerk Neji did. Yandere-sama saw it. Yes, I did, the Hokage grimaced and struggled to keep his appetite. I don't doubt that Neji needs some sense knocked through his head, I'm just wondering if you have another reason for wanting to beat this kid, Kushina shrugged. Another reason? Naruto frowned. Like what? Well, this Hinata girl's kinda cute, his mother smirked. I thought you might want to impress her and avenge her at the same time. Naruto gawked at her. MOOM. What? She asked innocently. There's nothing wrong with wanting to impress a cute girl. Mom, stop it. The boy groaned. She seems shy, but I bet she's very nice when you get to know her, the yandere remarked, cheerfully throwing his 2 cents in. No Yandere-sama, not you too. Naruto moaned and flopped face first onto the office carpet. The older blonde peered worriedly over his desk. Naruto, lots and lots of ninja have stood there in their dirty sandals, do you really want to stick your face into that? Grumbling incoherently, the boy rolled onto his back and stared moodily up at the ceiling. I'd much rather impress Sakura-chan. I'm sure that you would, Kushina sighed drearily. The yandere swallowed a chuckle and shook his head, he was well acquainted with this little disagreement. Naruto was sure that Haruno Sakura was the best girl in the whole world and the perfect girl for him, he just had to win her over. Kushina was much less enthusiastic about her son's pink-haired teammate and wished that he would chase after a girl who didn't feel the need to hit him every time he asked her out. Half-tuning their conversation out, the Hokage munched on his sushi and relaxed. It was nice when he and Kushina and Naruto were all together. When Naruto had enrolled in the academy, and when he had made genin, he was kept busy and out of the tower. I like this feeling, the Hokage smiled. It almost feels like we're a family. Kyuubi Hinata sank deep into her hospital bed and squeezed her eyes shut in shame. I can't believe I did that. I fainted on Naruto-kun again. Now he probably thinks I'm weak and weird. She tried so hard to change, to be stronger. When she'd fought her cousin, she thought she'd been close to succeeding for once in her life. He'd cheered for her then, he'd noticed her. If she could have won, it would have been absolutely perfect. But her cousin hadn't just won, he'd destroyed her. No matter how many times she forced herself to get up and try again, he simply swatted her down again like an annoying fly. He met her determination with scorn, he met her compassion with hatred. And then she couldn't fight anymore. Neji and I-san and Otasama are right, I am weak. No matter what I do. I just can't. A stabbing pain in her chest made her break into a coughing fit. When it subsided, she found tiny flecks of blood on her hand. Grimacing, she wiped her hand clean on the underside of her pillow. I need to get better. Shino-kun will be competing in the finals, and I need to go and support him. And Naruto-kun, he promised, I need to be there for him too. I will get better. I have to. I just have to. Chapter 7. Broken Vessel. Of all her admirers, Ebisu was near the top. And he shared that spot with Madogai. The taijutsu specialist had a much better personality than Ebisu did, but... well, he was Madogai. Kushina stared at the offered bouquet of flowers and managed a polite smile. Thanks guy, you really didn't have to. Such a youthful flower as yourself deserves only the best, Kushina-san. The green spandex-clad Jounin boomed enthusiastically. The red-haired woman stood there awkwardly and started to sweat as Madogai went on to extol her youthful virtues, while several other nearby ninja listened on in amusement. A few years back, Madogai had stumbled over her training. She liked to do taijutsu katas while standing on water, and sometimes she'd further challenge herself by working in some freestyle suiton at the same time. He'd been doing some of his insane training out in the forest when he'd caught sight of her, and apparently, he'd found her style of training and physical appearance to be supremely youthful. She hadn't been able to shake him since. Every time he caught sight of her, he would try to woo her. He brought her flowers or chocolates at least once a month. And she strongly suspected that half the reason that he entered into his silly rivalry with Kakashi was to try and prove his youthful manliness to her. And he's the only one who seems to be immune to Naruto the demon pariah, she grumbled. At least Naruto doesn't mind him that much. Of course, that means I have to be careful to keep him from adopting spandex. That's very nice, guy, she smiled tightly as he started to wind down, thank you. But I'm really busy right now. Why don't you go visit that student of yours that's in the hospital? A most excellent suggestion. Guy smiled brightly and pressed the flowers into her hands. I shall go and stoke my precious student's fires of youth. And then he dashed off to do just that. Kushina sighed in relief. The flowers were nice, she had to admit. They weren't from a flower shop, they were wildflowers that he'd probably picked while running laps around the village. Even though she didn't want to do anything to encourage him, she decided to keep the flowers. When she turned to find a good place to stash the bouquet, she nearly ran into the Hokage who had been standing behind her. She started a bit and wondered just how long he'd been standing there. She also wondered why he looked so irritated. What is it? He glanced down at the bundle of flowers in her hands and then brushed past her. It's nothing. Coffee, please. Kushina blinked at his back as he strode down the hall and disappeared around a corner towards his office. Nothing? Why do I not believe you? The Hokage had seen her get hit on before. It tended to make him uncomfortable and he usually ignored it. He never got irritated by it. Weird. The Hokage slumped into his comfortable swivel chair and glared at the mess of paperwork that covered his desktop. With all the security concerns on top of the chaos of the Chuunin exams, there was easily double the paperwork that there usually was. It didn't improve his mood any. Damn it! He thought blackly. Damn it, damn it, damn it. He'd seen other shinobi flirt with his assistant before. He always tried to ignore it, it wasn't any of his business. She was a grown woman, fully capable of accepting or rejecting the advances of other men as she pleased. He was embarrassing her, he scowled. But she was going to keep the flowers. She liked them. I don't get it. Coffee. His assistant announced as she breezed into the office with a steaming cup. She managed to find a flat spot on his messy desk to set the drink down and then gathered up some processed papers from his outbox. These are all set, right? Yeah, he nodded and stared into the dark liquid in his cup. Cheer up, she advised him. Whatever happens, the worst part of the exams will be over after tomorrow. Right, he agreed and sipped at his drink. Well, off to fairy papers. She waved, and then was gone. The yandere rolled his shoulders to try and relieve some tension and maybe relax a bit. That's right, the exams. I need to focus on that mess. I can't let petty personal things like jealousy distract me. He started to take another sip of his coffee, and froze. Not that I'm jealous of Madogai. I'm not jealous. I'm not. Naruto pouted and trudged through the streets, kicking a pebble as he went. It was the last day before the finals. He would have been training, but... Take tomorrow off, kid. Erosenin had laughed as he'd shooed Naruto home the previous evening. Relax. Strategize. Do whatever. The genin scowled and kicked the small stone extra hard. Stupid Erosenin. I don't want a day off, I want to train more. After he'd recovered from Gamabunta's test, his lecherous tutor had tested out his elemental affinity. The weird piece of paper had split down the middle, apparently signifying that futon was the elemental ninjutsu for him. There was supposedly some special training that he was supposed to do to help draw out his elemental affinity, but the pervert had him skip it in favor of learning one basic offensive and one basic defensive futon jutsu from scrolls. There wasn't time for much else. He'd spent most of the morning scouring all the places in the village that he'd expect to find the white-haired pervert, but had had no luck. Now it was lunchtime and he was starving and grouchy. He managed to kick his pebble down a storm drain grate and growled. Darn it! Glaring at the grate for a moment, Naruto groaned and looked around. His dispirited wanderings had brought him to the fringes of the village, a few blocks shy of the hospital. He turned his glare to the sterile white building that crouched in the distance. He hated hospitals. They were so white and boring and they smelled funny. There were lots of nasty needles, too. And none of the hospital staff ever seemed to like him. But Bushy Brows is probably still in the hospital. He's on Niji's team and strives to beat him too, so he'd know a lot about what that creep can do. And Erosenin said to strategize. Mind made up, Naruto marched on to the hospital, intent on interviewing Rock Lee on Hyuga Niji. After that, he would go and get some lunch and think up some wicked ideas for beating Niji up. That was the plan for the moment. That plan was revised when he encountered Shikamaru in the hospital lobby. His lazy former classmate was skulking out of the hospital just as Naruto was scampering in. The Nara boy looked annoyed and had a basket of fruit dangling from one head. Naruto was hungry and intrigued. Hey Shikamaru. What's with the basket? I brought it for Chuji, but the doctors wouldn't let him have it, Shikamaru grumbled. Troublesome. Naruto frowned. What's wrong with Chuji? Nothing serious, Shikamaru sighed. He just ate too much and got some indigestion. Oh, Naruto snickered. Then his stomach growled. Hey, since he's not gonna eat that, can I have some? Sure. Shikamaru grabbed an apple and tossed it to the blonde. Thanks. Naruto brought the apple to his mouth, but paused before biting into it as a brilliant idea struck him. What? Naruto grinned wickedly at his friend. Let's eat this stuff in front of Chuji. It'll drive him crazy. Shikamaru snorted. You've got an evil mind, Naruto. He considered the idea for a moment. Sure, let's do it. Yeah. Naruto grinned. So, they journeyed into the evil bowels of the hospital together and bearing a basket of fruit on a mission to tease their mutual friend. After a little food and fun, he could go on to meet with Rock Lee and dig up some dirt on Niji. That was the plan now. Yes, that was the plan. Kushina settled into a quiet corner of the tower that she had claimed as her office, dug out her thermos, and enjoyed her favorite flavor of tea. Tea was far superior to coffee, in her opinion. It came in a wide variety of flavors, and didn't smell or taste nasty like coffee. How the Hokage could stand to drink that stuff every day she really didn't know. No. Mommy? That got her attention instantly. Naruto stopped calling her mommy around age 7 when he found that mom was much shorter and more grown up. He only fell back on mommy when he was very upset, like after his bastard teacher, Mizuki, had dropped the fox demon bombshell on his head. Looking up from her cup of tea, she found her son standing pale and shaken in front of her. He didn't look hurt or like he'd been in a fight, but that was little comfort. Sometimes words could be more devastating than beatings. What is it, Naro-chan? He didn't protest the childish endearment, which normally he would, and immediately launched into a barely coherent rush of words. I was at the hospital and he said, there's this sand demon. Whoa, slow down. She briefly clapped her hand over his mouth to still his panicked babbling. Now one thing at a time. You went to the hospital, why? I went to go talk to Bushy Brows about Neji, Naruto answered. And I ran into Shikamaru and he had some food and we were going to eat it in front of Chuji and then. Remember to breathe, she reminded him. So, what happened next? We passed Bushy Brows' room and that Gaara guy was in there, and he was about to kill him with his sand. That made Kushina's blood run icy cold. Shikamaru was able to stop him with his shadows, Naruto continued. And we asked him what the heck he thought he was doing and he said he was going to kill Bushy Brows just because he felt like it. Okay, this Gaara kid is a freaking sociopath. It was one thing to kill an opponent in the heat of battle. It was something else entirely to track that opponent down weeks after the battle had gone down and try to kill him while he laid helpless in a hospital. What was Lee doing while all this was going down? He was asleep the whole time, Naruto shrugged. Maybe the doctors had him on medicine or something. Kushina sighed. So, what happened next? We asked him why he'd just want to kill somebody for the heck of it, and then he goes and tells us his life story. Naruto's eyes grew fearfully wide. He told us about this sand demon, Shikaku, and how his dad, the Kazekage, sealed it inside him and that's how he can do that stuff with the sand. And then he goes on about the sand being his mother and how his only purpose in life is to kill and how the Kazekage keeps sending assassins after him because he's a failed weapon or something and stuff like that. And then what? She asked, dreading the answer. Bushy Brows Sensei showed up and Gaara left. It took a few minutes for Kushina to absorb every horrifying piece of information that Naruto had thrown at her. But once she had, she quickly came up with a plan of action. Abandoning her tea and her break time, she towed Naruto along towards the Hokage's office, pausing briefly to send an ANBU to find Jiraiya at the Hokage's request. The Hokage's request was a little white lie on her part, but one that she felt was necessary. She didn't want to waste time persuading the Hokage to summon Jiraiya and then wait for the Sannin to show up. It was best if Naruto only had to repeat his account one more time. The Hokage was on break too, so there was no waiting for other business to finish to get in and see him. The elder blonde paused in sipping at his coffee and looked at them questioningly. Kushina pulled up a few chairs so she and Naruto could sit as they waited for the Sannin to show up. Is something wrong? The Hokage asked. As soon as everyone's here, we'll start, Kushina assured him. Hopefully he won't take too long. Thankfully the ANBU seemed to have located Jiraiya quickly and the lecher didn't drag his feet in showing up. Within 10 minutes the white-haired Sannin popped in through one of the office windows. He eyed the office occupants curiously. I was summoned? Yes, Kushina nodded and turned to her son. Now tell them what happened at the hospital. Naruto complied. After getting the story out once, he was much calmer. As his little story progressed, she watched both men's faces grow grimmer and grimmer. So, are you going to do something about Gaara? Naruto asked curiously as he finished. That is for us to worry about, it's our job after all. Kushina managed to smile. You have your match with Neji to focus on. Or, are you going to let this distract you from keeping that promise you made? No way. Naruto scowled. Good. She nodded in satisfaction and fished out some money for him. Why don't you get some dinner at Ichiraku's on me? Awesome. The boy grinned and eagerly took the cash. Thanks, Mom. And then he was out the door and temporarily distracted from his disturbing encounter. Kushina rubbed a hand over her face and turned to Jiraiya. What do you think of that? Shikaku. The Sannin muttered to himself. I'm fairly certain that's the Ichibi. So, Suna has sent their Jinchuriki here. The Hokage rubbed tiredly at his eyes. I don't suppose I could get away with expelling Gaara from the exams? No, probably not, Jiraiya sighed. He's the son of the Kazekage. Just because he's a Jinchuriki and we're afraid of what he might do isn't grounds for expelling him. He may have mangled Rock Lee, but he didn't kill him in the ring and he didn't kill him in the hospital. He may have killed Dosu, but there's no witness, no proof. Kushina sagged in her chair. Until he actually does something, we can't touch him. It doesn't seem right to do nothing, though, the Hokage muttered, frustrated. How dangerous is this Ichibi in comparison to the Kyuubi? It's much weaker, Jiraiya answered. Much weaker. But it seems that this Gaara Kid Seal is also a lot weaker, and if he were to fully release the demon, he could still be incredibly destructive. The Yondaime tapped thoughtfully on his desktop. If the Ichibi is a demon like the Kyuubi, it should be possible to subdue it in the same way. What do you have in mind? The Sannin inquired. That boy that Orochimaru experimented on, the one he infused with the Shodai's Mokuton powers. He should be able to stop Sabaku no Gaara if he gets out of hand, right? Kushina smiled faintly. He didn't always think like a shinobi, but he would still think. His memory was a mess, but his sharp mind still functioned fairly well. He should, Jiraiya agreed. Get Tenzo assigned to the stadium and we should have a good safety net. I'll do that then, the Hokage decided and then slumped a little as he had the cluttered pile of form on his desk. I just have to find the deployment schedule. Kushina snorted and moved to assist him. Jiraiya seemed to take that as his cue to leave, for when she next looked, he was gone. And when she'd located the necessary paperwork, passed along the changed schedule to the appropriate department, and gotten back to her poor forgotten tea, it was cold. Naruto nibbled distractedly at his ramen. Tucci the ramen chef knew about his upcoming match and had added a bunch of stuff to his soup for free. But there was too much weighing on his mind for him to enjoy it. He had met someone like him, someone who held a demon. And yet Gaara was so different. So different and so the same. He is what I would be if I didn't have my mom. He is what I would be if Yandi-sama hated me. He is me without love or hope. The genin shook his head and shoveled down his dinner. I shouldn't think about Gaara, he frowned, remembering what his mother had said. I need to keep my mind on the finals tomorrow. But, thinking about his match with Neji and the promise that he'd made didn't make him feel any better. Sabaku no Gaara perched on a rooftop and stared up at the nearly full moon. He would simply sit and stare all night. He never slept. Tomorrow I shall prove my existence. Blood, his mother crooned. I thirst for blood, dear Gaara-kun. Tomorrow, mother, he answered. The Kazekage promised us blood. Why wait? It was an excellent question, really. Why should he wait? Konoha was a large village full of weak fools. It is best to destroy strong opponents to feel alive. If I wait until tomorrow, I will get to kill Uchiha Sasuke. He is strong. Yes, and Uchiha. His mother sounded so excited. Dangerous, but he will be delicious. Mother approved, and so he would gladly soak her sand with his opponent's blood. Anticipation of the kill made him shiver. He almost smiled. And after the Uchiha, and all the destruction that follows, I will find Rock Lee and kill him, Gaara decided. No one will stop me this time. Not that sensei of his, not that boy in his shadows, not that blonde fool in the black and orange. He can't kill me. I have a real monster inside me. I won't lose to him. That boy. Mother sounded worried. I don't like that boy. I don't like the smell of his chakra. You should kill him, Gaara-kun, kill him quickly. He is nothing but bluster and bravado, Gaara sneered. Uzumaki Naruto is not worth killing. Uchiha Sasuke is my prey. Chapter 8. Broken Birdcage. Training, he missed it. Without his training, without the step-by-step strengthening towards his goal, there was only the goal. And his goal, even with all his preparation, seemed to loom over him, crush him. Naruto was supposed to be heading towards the stadium and the final round of the Chuunin exams, but he found himself heading in the opposite direction instead. He'd barely slept at all the night before. His mother had tried to cheer him up, but it hadn't worked like it usually did. She was his mother, and no matter what the situation was, parents always believed in their children. Even if things were hopeless, she would believe in him. And going up against an opponent like Hyuga Neji, it did feel hopeless. Neji was bigger and older and more experienced. He possessed a Kekkai Genkai that Naruto was only barely familiar with. He fought within a weird but dangerous and devastating style which he had used to beat the crap out of his cousin, another Juken fighter, without taking a single hit himself. He was a genius, and everyone else thought that he was going to win. Naruto skulked into a training field, the very same one where Kakashi-sensei had administered his personal genin exam, and leaned his shoulder against one of the wooden posts. Mom thinks I can, and Yandi-sama would probably say so too if I asked him, but... He thought about Sakura-chan, and Ino, too, he supposed, and how she always rolled her eyes at him and went after Sasuke because the Uchiha was so much better. He thought about Sasuke and how the Uchiha always looked down on him and ignored him because he wasn't worth it. He thought about how everyone, except for his mother and the Yandame, but they didn't count, always laughed or shook their head at him when he stated his ultimate goal of becoming Hokage. He thought about Neji, how he was just like Sasuke, and the promise that he'd made an oath on blood. If only there was someone else who thought I could do it, anyone else. Naruto sagged where he stood. It wouldn't seem so impossible then. Some sound caught his attention and he looked around. Hey, who's there? A slight figure timidly peeked around one of the other posts and Naruto blinked in surprise. Hinata? The Yandame Hokage stood several yards away from the stadium entrance and tried not to look impatient as he waited. For the first time in a very long time, his assistant would not watch the final tournament with him. Instead, he would sit in the place of honor, the highest observation balcony, with a few guards, the Yandame Kazekage and the Suna leader's guards, no company at all. He was not at all looking forward to it. Even though he really shouldn't, he wanted to wish Naruto well before the tournament got underway. This was an exam and he shouldn't have any favorites among the participants. He needed to objectively judge the skills of the entered genin and see if any were worthy of being elevated to Chuunin. But, it was Naruto, and if he didn't show up soon the Hokage would have to head off to his seat without doing that. Where is he? The Hokage wondered, casually glancing around at the sluggish stream of spectators heading into the stadium to cheer or jeer at the contestants. Where is she? Where are they? I have to head inside in 10 minutes. Hokage-sama, he snapped his head around and smiled at the sight of his assistant. Has Naruto shown up yet? His smile died. No, why? We left the apartment together, but about halfway here I noticed that he wasn't following me anymore. She nervously nibbled at her lower lip. I was hoping that he'd just rushed on ahead. The Hokage glanced questioningly at the ANBU who skulked at his shoulder, and got a negative response. He hasn't signed in yet, he's not here, the blonde frowned. Damn it, she cursed worriedly. I was afraid of that. Why? He's been stressed out ever since last night, she sighed. I tried to get him focused, but... She shook her head. He's got a lot riding on this fight. He has a very tough opponent to face down and beat in order to keep an important promise, in order to advance in the tournament to face Sasuke, and in order to achieve promotion to Chuunin. That's a lot for a 12-year-old to deal with, ninja or not. He's probably freaked out and as far away from here as... Hi, Mom. Hi, Yandi-sama. Naruto skidded onto the scene and hopped from foot to foot with excited energy. How long until the tournament starts? About 15 minutes, the Hokage answered, relieved to see the boy and see his high spirits. Yeah, I'm not late. The boy cheered. His mother frowned at him. Where have you been? Naruto sheepishly rubbed at the back of his head. I went for a walk. I should go sign in now, bye. Naruto. She snapped at her son's rapidly retreating back. Brat, she muttered. I'll have to get the whole story out of him later. Well, at least he seems to be ready now, the Hokage smiled. Yes, the redhead nodded. He's a lot better than he was earlier. She pouted. Now I really want to know about his little walk. He chuckled. If it's anything interesting you'll tell me, right? Of course. She flashed him a cheery grin. Are you ready to banter with the Kazekage? The Hokage's shoulders slumped. Not really. While one of his first accomplishments as Hokage was negotiating a treaty between their two villages, he had no love for his fellow Kage. The Kazekage wore a veil over his mouth, adding to the already concealing nature of the normal Kage robes. When he held audiences, be it with foreigners or his own ninja, the Kazekage would even further conceal himself by sitting on a raised dais behind a sheer screen, and have his petitioners kneel on the sandstone floor and bow to him. And now, with what he'd heard about the man's youngest son, Gaara. The man was a jerk and a creep at the very least. Look on the bright side, it'll only be for a few hours, his assistant grinned. You've suffered through council meetings that have dragged on longer. I still wish that you were sitting with me, he frowned. You can handle it. She grasped his hand and gave it a brief, comforting squeeze. You're the Hokage after all. Impulsively he shifted his hand in her grip and laced his fingers with hers. Yes, he half-smiled, I am. Her bluish-green eyes widened and his smile broadened in response. While her hands were smaller and more slender than his own, they were by no means delicate, they bore calluses and small faded scars, the legacy of her old kunoichi career. It occurred to him that all he had to do was lightly pull on her hand to close the small gap between them, and then he could. A spike of fire slammed into his forehead and he dropped her hand like a hot coal. Blinking against the pain, he managed to blank his mind of whatever he'd been thinking about before the headache could spiral into an out-of-control migraine. When the problem cleared up, he found his loyal assistant looking at him in concern. Are you all right, Hokage-sama? For a brief moment, he was irrationally angry. Even though he had given her permission to, she had never once used his actual name. It was always Hokage-sama or Yandeme-sama, it was never ever Namikaze or Minato anything. He wanted to yell at her, demand that she stops using that damn title. But he didn't. I'm fine. He forced a smile. I just got a little sun in my eyes, that's all. I should get up to my seat, I'll see you after the exams. The young Hokage practically bolted from her, too confused and upset to end their conversation more politely. What the heck was that? He frowned as he climbed the many flights of stairs that led up to his seat. It's never acted up just from holding someone's hand before. He stubbed his toe on a stair and hissed in a pained breath. Forget it, he thought darkly. I'll worry about it and everything else after the exams. I'll have plenty of time then. It hadn't been a confession, but it had been something. I talked to him. I barely stuttered. I didn't faint. And he said. Her chest started to burn and Hinata yanked herself back to the present to get her excited breathing under control. If she didn't stay calm, she risked her Juken injuries relapsing. And if that happened, she wouldn't be able to watch the matches and support Naruto and Shino. She really should have stayed home. The last bit of damage that Niji had done to her stubbornly refused to fully heal, leaving her coughing up a little bit of blood every day. Coming to the stadium to watch the matches in person was just asking for trouble. But even if I stayed home, I would still worry. She nervously fidgeted her fingers as she trailed after Kiba and Akamaru through the stands as they sought some open seats. Besides, I promised that I would be here, and if something does happen to me, at least I'll have seen some of the fights with my own eyes. This looks like a good spot. Kiba grinned as they came to 3 open seats next to a pair of Chuunin that Hinata thought worked at the village gates. What do you think, Hinata? Aye, it's good, she nodded. Kiba sat down next to the Chuunin with Akamaru perched on top of his head. She sat next to him, leaving the seat bordering the aisle open. The pair of Chuunin next to Kiba started debating the possible outcomes of the first matches, but Hinata tuned them out as she waited for the final round of the exam to begin. I think I like people like you. Hinata hugged herself and stared dreamily off into space. Naruto-kun. Is this seat taken? The Hyuga girl blinked and looked up to find a woman eyeing the open seat next to her curiously. The stranger was dressed in civilian clothing with her long bangs held back by a black beret and her very long red hair bound in a braid that was draped over her shoulder. She had large eyes that were a mixture of blue and green and a warm, friendly smile. Hinata thought that she looked like a woman who worked in the Hokage tower, but this was the first time she'd seen this person so close before. And no, Hinata timidly squeaked. You can sit here, if you want. Thanks. The woman grinned and sat down in the empty seat. You're a Hyuga, right? Why yes, Hinata nodded and started her nervous fidgeting. Her eyes had given her away, of course. Even when not active, the Byakugan was obvious. While her eyes were useful, she really didn't like them and would gladly exchange them for normal eyes if she could. That's cool, the woman replied. My name is Kushina, what's your name? Hinata, the girl answered. That's a very pretty name. Hinata ducked her head and flushed at the compliment. Thank you. So, tell me, are there any fighters in the tournament that you're going to cheer for? The Kushina woman asked. Why yes, Hinata nodded. And my teammate, Shinokuin, and some former classmates. The red-haired woman nodded, as if in approval, and then turned to introduce herself to Kiba and ask about Akamaru. Relieved to no longer be the focus of conversation, Hinata relaxed and studied her new acquaintance. This woman reminded her of her sensei, Kurenai. She exuded a sense of confidence that Hinata wished she could possess too. Although this woman seemed bolder than Kurenai somehow. Oh look, they're starting. Hinata started a bit, and followed Kushina's pointing finger down into the grassy arena below. The proctor and referee had herded the fighters out into a line in full view of the crowd. Her eyes drifted over Shino and her cousin Neji before locking onto Naruto's bright presence. I hear the first match is between a Hyuga and someone else, Kushina remarked. Who do you two want to win? Kiba grumbled a bit before answering. I'd like Naruto to win because Neji's a jerk, but Neji will probably win. It was harder for Hinata to answer. While Neji had brutally beaten her and aimed to kill her, she understood why. She didn't care that he was a branch member or that he hated her. He was family and she greatly admired his strength and skill. It would be good for him and good for the clan if he won. But she gave in to the impulse to be selfish. I want Naruto-kun to win. I want him to be able to keep his promise. I want him to get to be Chuunin. I want Naruto-kun to win. Kushina wasn't spying. Spying was done on enemies. She was gathering information, which was totally different. Cute girl, she mused as the genin fighters headed for their waiting area set into the side of the high-walled arena. The stuttering is a bit off-putting, though. And she's got the spine of a wet noodle. Maybe it's the whole underdog thing that got Naruto to make that promise. She'd seen glimpses of the girl when she came to the tower to get and report on missions, but never directly interacted with little Hyuga Hinata. Catching sight of the girl in the stadium crowd, she took advantage of the open seat to see what she could find out about the Hyuga clan heir. Any girl that took Naruto's focus off Sakura was well worth investigating. It's too bad that Naruto's match is the first one. That doesn't leave much time to chit-chat before things get going. I'll just have to wait until the intermission after all the first-round matches are completed to talk to her more. Her mind drifted over the Hokage and how, after a solid decade of working with him, he was suddenly odd. Earlier, when he'd held her hand and smiled at her, it was almost like he was his old self again. It was over just as quickly as it had started, with a jolt from the seal, which he had tried to blame on a blinding flash of sunlight so that she wouldn't worry. But why? All seals break down over time. After 13 years, is that damn thing on his forehead finally starting to fail? Kushina shifted in her seat and ignored the cold metal pressed against the skin of her side. While she was dressed down as a civilian in a longer-sleeved white shirt, dark green vest, and casual black pants, she was well armed with various concealed blades. With all the crap about Orochimaru and Oto and Suna, she was determined to be ready for anything, while devoutly hoping that all that happened was nothing. Before she had much chance to brood on the chances of potential extra-exam violence, Naruto and his opponent, Hyuga Neji, strode out into the center of the arena under the watchful gaze of the proctor and a stadium full of spectators. But Naruto didn't look bothered, he looked focused and determined, and that was good. Kushina edged further forward in her seat. Here we go. Things started off predictably enough. There was the usual trash-talking and boasting, basic little bits of mental warfare. It went a bit sideways when Neji took his hideate off and revealed his caged bird seal to Naruto, but after the impromptu lesson the first blows were exchanged and the match was on. Naruto was aggressive and direct as always. Neji danced and flipped out of the way of every lunge with all the grace that the Hyuga were known for. Naruto cracked out his Kage Bunshin in an attempt to overwhelm his opponent. Neji defended himself with the Kaiten, a jutsu restricted to main family members, something Neji shouldn't know. Naruto tried to use his new futon skills, but his one attack was like an invisible fist, not a blade, so the damage he could do was very limited. Neji was unbothered, and launched into aggressive Juken strikes. The tension in the atmosphere ratcheted higher and higher. Naruto was giving it his all, but he was barely getting anywhere. Neji was barely affected and kept on dishing out punishment on his adversary. Her son seemed on the path to defeat, and yet he kept getting up. And there was something else. The more intense the battle got, the more Hinata coughed. Every time Kushina felt herself getting totally sucked into the fight, she would hear the girl sitting next to her cough. And then it went from coughing to coughing up blood. Damn it, she's relapsing. That was one of the problems of Juken injuries. If they didn't heal enough and the victim was put in a stressful situation, the wounds would deteriorate and ooze blood and, without treatment, eventually end in death. Hinata needed to see a medic now or risk her injuries leading to permanent disability or fatality. I guess I won't get to see all of the match. May I be of assistance? I'm a medic. The speaker wore an ANBU mask feline with no distinguishing marks, so she really couldn't identify him, and a hooded black robe. It wasn't unusual for an ANBU to be around, but to leave his post to help a spectator without being summoned, it felt off. But before she could talk to the masked man, Kiba was already helping Hinata, who was rapidly losing consciousness, out of her seat and after the ANBU to get treatment. Odd, very odd. Kushina frowned, but turned back to the fight. But her teammate is with her. I'll check on them later, and fill them in on how the fight went. She turned back to the arena, just in time to see her son get hit with one of the Hyuga clan's most devastating attacks. Finger-jabbing strikes flew too fast for the eye to really see, each set of strikes exponentially more than the last. And when it was over, Naruto's chakra would be blocked and he would be left paralyzed. But then Naruto got back up. He shouldn't be able to do that, right? And then Naruto started gathering chakra. He can't do that unless a Hyuga unblocks his system or... Her eyes narrowed. Red? Oh. Kushina could barely breathe as things exploded. Naruto was faster now. Much faster. But Neji's Hyuga techniques seemed able to still keep Naruto at bay. And then the Kaiten met demon chakra and exploded. When the dust cleared. No. Her heart sank as she saw Naruto prone on the ground and Neji battered but still standing. Naruto, get up, get up. Neji trudged over to his victim and said something. The crowd was silent, but the walls of the arena were too high and the Hyuga was speaking too quietly for anything to be heard. The proctor looked on and seemed ready to call out the victor. Naruto popped out of the ground like a berry jack-in-the-box, popped Neji under the chin and toppled the older boy backwards, and the diversionary Bunshin dispelled in a cloud of white smoke. Yes. My baby is awesome. Fate was cruel. First it had shuffled his father into the branch family because he was born second. Then it had killed his father to appease a foreign village. It made him greater than his cousin, but relegated him to the lesser part of the clan. And now fate humiliated him by allowing him to crush his pathetic cousin with ease and then allow him to be defeated by an idiot. For a genius you're pretty stupid. Hyuga Neji tilted his head slightly about the only movement he could manage and saw his opponent, Uzumaki Naruto, wavering but still standing and staring down at him. Fate favors you more than me, it seems. That's bullshit. Naruto snarled. A cop-out. I don't believe in fate, it's just a lame excuse. The younger boy glared at him, panting. I failed the genin exams 3 times and if there was such a thing as fate, I would never be a ninja. But I am. I didn't just lay down and give up and mope about it, I kept trying. And I'm going to do more than just be a ninja, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be Hokage one day. And when I achieve that, I'm going to find a way to get rid of the caged bird seal. Neji just stared at the blonde, unsure of how to respond to such a ridiculous declaration. You're a smart guy, Neji. You figured out all those techniques just by watching. So stop doing stupid stuff like throwing blame around. Your dad's death wasn't Hinata's fault, she doesn't deserve your hatred. The main family and that seal on your head aren't holding you down, quit using that as an excuse. The only thing that's holding you back is you. The Hyuga boy frowned at him. If you want to be a great ninja, then do it. You can figure out a way, no matter what your clan might do. Because you're no failure, you're a freaking genius. And with that, Naruto turned away. The proctor gnawed on the Senbon needle clenched between his teeth before raising an arm and bellowing, "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto!" The crowd roared. Medics arrived and loaded Neji onto a stretcher to carry him away for treatment. What a fool. And yet, I want to believe him. I want to hope as he hopes. Maybe. A bird circled overhead. Maybe. Chapter 9. Broken Peace. The Hokage was beyond annoyed with Hatake Kakashi. He had grudgingly accepted the fact that the silver-haired man would never be on time for anything. But this was just crossing the line. Sasuke had missed the deadline for reporting to the final exam tournament. Normally this would count as a forfeit for the Uchiha. However, there was a great deal of anticipation to see Sasuke, the son of the deceased Uchiha clan leader and younger brother of the clan's murderer, fight in the tournament. So, in order to satisfy the masses and several important dignitaries, and to avoid punishing Sasuke for his teacher's chronic tardiness, Sasuke was not disqualified and the tournament got underway without his arrival. Naruto's match had been fantastic. The Yondaime was well aware that he was biased, but he didn't care. It had been a suspenseful match, which pleased the crowd a great deal. Naruto had won, kept his little promise, and not gone berserk with that flare of demonic chakra which pleased the Hokage. But Sasuke's match with Gaara was supposed to follow Naruto's match with Neji, and the Uchiha boy still had not arrived. Again, he should have been disqualified, but the Yondaime bent the rules once more. And the Hokage's irritation with the man who supposedly had been his student burned hotter. Shino's match with Kankuro should have followed Sasuke's skipped match, but Gaara's older brother unexpectedly withdrew from the competition. That had been very worrisome. Kankuro had seemed very confident and was clearly skilled enough to have advanced to where he had in the exams. So why had he withdrawn mere moments before his match was to begin? Regardless of Kankuro's inexplicable forfeit, the tournament continued with Shikamaru's bout against Temari. Although not as flashy as Naruto's fight, the Hokage found Shikamaru's performance just as entertaining. The Nara clan was known for producing fine strategists, and Shikamaru was no exception. His brains handily outdid the Suna Kunoichi's brains and her punishing wins. Even though he had quit at the end, the Nara boy's chances were very good for being promoted. If he gets a high enough score to get promoted, I can't wait to see his face. The Yandame's amusement died quickly, because with the conclusion of that match, there was no more stalling for Sasuke. I have to remember to have Kushina-san help me come up with a suitable punishment for Kakashi-san. The Hokage swallowed a sigh and prepared to declare Uchiha Sasuke disqualified to move the tournament along. There was an excited stirring in the audience, and the Yandame glanced down to find that Hatake Kakashi had finally made his dramatic arrival with his student Uchiha Sasuke. I'm still going to punish him. Kakashi-san is a grown man and an experienced ninja, he should know how to be on time. To almost ruin his student's chance for advancement, irresponsible and unacceptable. The Yandame Hokage quietly seated in his seat while trying to hide his ire from the Kazekage. He was able to set aside his irritation for later as Sasuke finally entered the arena to face down Sabaka no Gaara. The crowd was hushed and tense in anticipation as the biggest fight in the first round, one of the last Uchiha against the deadly child of the Kazekage, was moments away from beginning. Gaara loosed some of his sand, and then Sasuke blurred into motion. The Uchiha boy was fast, much faster than he had been before. And it quickly became obvious to the Hokage that Sasuke was utilizing elements of Rock Lee's fighting style, which he had copied with his Kekkai Genkai at some earlier point. With his vastly increased speed, his hard-hitting taijutsu, and the predictive abilities of his Sharingan, Sasuke quickly got around Gaara's sand and started doing the red-headed boy some mild damage. It almost seemed to be a blow-by-blow repeat of Gaara's fight with Rock Lee. The Hokage watched as the same moves had the same result on the Suna boy. And Gaara seemed to notice this too, which led him to do something different. Gaara wrapped himself in a sphere of sand, generated a sand globe that seemed to be an eye, and then apparently just sat there. Sasuke tried to attack the sphere, but spikes of sand grew out of the surface of it and tried to skewer him. The Suna Genin wouldn't come out or attack, and the Konoha Genin couldn't deal a single blow. It looked like a stalemate. And then Sasuke backed off, scaled the side of the high-walled arena with chakra, and started to gather lightning to one of his fists. He taught him that? The Hokage was hazy on the details of ninja combat and skills. He mostly operated on instinct for the most part and couldn't recall the fine details of what he was doing or how, except with seals. He really liked those and they seemed more like art than something that was intended to kill another person. But he worked enough with his former student to recognize one of Kakashi's signature moves. The Raikiri is too high-powered for a genin, even one like Sasuke. It must be the Chidori then. Straining his ears, he could hear the distant sound of crackling energy masquerading as thousands of chirping birds. The Hokage blinked and almost missed Sasuke darting into motion. With the aid of his Sharingan, the Uchiha got in close, dodged around the sand spikes, and slammed his jutsu into and through the shell of sand. There was silence, and then Gaara screamed. So Sasuke's scored a real hit. The Hokage frowned at Gaara's extreme reaction. With the way that he's screaming, it's almost like he's never suffered any real pain before. But that can't be right. Maybe he's just surprised that someone got through that sand cocoon of his. The atmosphere seemed to darken and Sasuke tried to free his arm. After a bit of struggle, he succeeded, and pulled something out with him. It was an ugly yellowish tan color, a marked difference from the sand of the protective shell. Whatever it was lost its grip on Sasuke and quickly retreated into the cocoon. That thing, what was it? The hair on the back of the Hokage's neck prickled. Could that have been that demon, Shikaku? But then the sand shell collapsed, revealing a bleeding Gaara on the ground. The wound didn't look serious, certainly not serious enough to make the boy collapse. The red-headed boy sat in a pile of limp sand, clutching at his head, and looking to be in some kind of pain. Is he having some kind of psychotic break? It really looked that way. Gaara didn't seem aware of where he was or what was going on. Sasuke didn't know what he should do.
And the proctor, Shiranui Ganma, chewed on his sunbon needle and scowled at the whole scene.
I guess that's it. And then it started snowing feathers. What the? Pain.
Pure agony burst from the seal and stabbed deep into his brain.
There was no slow build-up, no gradual escalation. It was 0 to full-blown migraine in an instant. That had never happened before.
There was an explosion of smoke. Someone had grabbed him, yanked him upwards.
Scaly things coiled around him like ropes.
He had to get away, had to escape, but he couldn't.
To use his Hiraishin no Jutsu, to use any sort of escape jutsu, he needed to focus. And he couldn't focus, it hurt too much.
There was no escape.
Snakes?
The scaly coils were snakes. Large snakes with strangely patterned scales.
Summon snakes. Blinking against the burning, stabbing pains, he squinted at the Kazekage.
The Kazekage stood on the red roof tiles with his back to the Hokage.
The leader of Tsunade shed his blue and white hat, and then his blue and white robes.
And then he turned around and peeled off his face. Golden serpent eyes leered back at the Hokage maliciously.
Hello Minato-kun. It's been such a long time. Tenzo, codename Yamato, broke the genjutsu as soon as he noticed it and immediately rushed towards the Hokage.
He'd been stationed at the fighting arena in order to deal with Sabaku no Gaara should the boy get out of hand. But the Tsunade Jinchuriki was out of commission, his building demonic chakra had collapsed to nothing, and now his leader needed his ANBU.
He was too late.
The yondaime had been hauled to the roof of the stadium building, and 4 young mystery ninja formed the corners of a square barrier ninjutsu. One of the other ANBU tried to charge through it before it had stabilized, but he was shocked severely and repelled. There was no getting through. Through the grayish distorting haze of the barrier, he could see the Hokage limp and bound by serpents. There seemed to be no reason for their leader to not fight back or escape. The Kazekage stood nearby on the roof, and shed his disguise to reveal the rogue Sannin underneath.
Orochimaru, Yamato cursed behind his mask. But if Orochimaru was the Kazekage, where is the real Kazekage?
Shunting aside the question, and a good dozen others, Yamato focused on the situation in front of him.
Yondaime-sama, why hasn't he escaped?
Kushina hated to admit it, but she almost fell for the snowing feathers genjutsu that some jerk cast over the entire stadium. But she shook it off and broke the illusion's hold over her mind. All around her the civilians and the lesser ninjas slumped over in genjutsu-induced sleep, and she pretended to, too. While she was slumped over in false sleep, she kept her senses alert. She caught a glimpse of a turban-wearing Sunanin prowling nearby. And then there a ninja with a musical eighth note and odonin that darted past her. It's one of the worst-case scenarios, she thought grimly as she slipped her leaf hideate out of an inside pocket of her light vest and loosely tied it around her neck.
Oto is an enemy. Suna is backstabbing us.
And they're working together to try and cut Konoha's throat. Easing one of her concealed kunai blades into her hand, she carefully watched and waited, and lunged at the back of a nearby unsuspecting odonin. Odonin.
He never knew what hit him.
She hadn't been in the field in years.
She hadn't admittedly kept her training up the standards of a field ninja of her rank.
But she trained with Naruto, she kept in shape, and she retained the experience.
In this emergency, it would be enough.
Releasing the corpse, she retreated towards the back of the stands. With a solid wall at her back, there was no way someone could sneak up behind her. And if she could find some Konohanin to join up with, all the better. As she vaulted up the stair-step rows of seats, she tried not to think about Hinata and Kiba. The strange ANBU had carried Hinata off for treatment and Kiba and his puppy had followed. The Inuzuka boy had briefly returned to the seats to watch Shino's match, and when it didn't happen, he left to check on the Hyuga girl.
He hadn't come back. She's in the stadium infirmary. He's still with her. They're fine. Focus on the present.
Kushina managed to knock off another Otonin and a Sunanin before she Kawarimi'd away from an enemy attack, reappearing on one of the higher balconies where the dignitaries sat to watch the fights.
Her new position gave her a great view of the various small skirmishes going on in the arena and stands below.
It also gave her a glimpse of part of the red-tiled stadium roof.
What's that?
She frowned and squinted at a grayish rectangular pillar of something that rose off the rooftop.
A barrier? But why? What for?
Shrugging it off, she left it for the ANBU to deal with and looked down again to try and determine where she should go next.
There's Kakashi, she noted. And Guy. And look at all those ninja who are trying to kill them. Might as well head in that direction.
Before she ditched her spot on the balcony full of snoozing nobles and their entourages, she looked towards the Hokage's balcony where the Yondaime and the Kazekage sat.
It looked like a small bomb had gone off there, and there was no sign of either Kage. Crap.
While she had held her distance from the Yondaime in the earliest days of his reign, and in his earliest days of amnesia, Kakashi had spent most of his time trying to be his addled sensei's shadow. After she had found herself drawn back to the mind-wiped Hokage's side, Kakashi would occasionally drop by to talk with her about the old times. And sometimes he'd share little horror stories of trying to deal with his precious sensei who didn't know him anymore. When it was discovered that the future Yondaime still retained his ninja skills and abilities, it was necessary to test him to see how much he could still do and how well he could do it. And the best way to test that was to engage him in practice spars.
This led to a lot of problems. The confused man didn't want to fight. He had to be coaxed into sparring with other ninjas, and he was always terrified of hurting his opponents. When he was sneak attacked with no warning, he would react instinctively and appropriately for a ninja. But once he had subdued his attacker and it caught up with him that he had hit or hurt the person, he would immediately fall apart and start apologizing. Reacting that way in actual combat was a good way to get killed, and so he had been pulled from active field duty up until the time that he'd been installed as the next Hokage. If he gets into a tight spot where the ANBU can't protect him, he can run away. He still can use the Hiration. He will run away and let the rest of us handle this. She shook her head and dropped from the mid-level balcony to work her way towards Kakashi and Guy. Please run away. The Hokage wheezed as the snakes tightened slightly around his helpless body. Ah, it's so nice to be back. Orochimaru purred as he lazily paced around his captive on the rooftop. The village looks the same, except for that addition to the Hokage monument. I think I'll blow it up. The entrapped Hokage tried to ask a question, but could only croak out, How? How can I trigger that seal on your forehead? Golden eyes glittered in wicked glee. It's very simple, Minato-kun. I put it there. Why? Relax, the rogue Sannin purred. I'll explain everything. With my Sound 4 holding up their barrier, no one will be able to interrupt. One of the binding snakes shifted and sank its fangs into the Yondaime's neck. Don't worry, the venom won't kill you, Orochimaru smirked, noting the fearful widening of his victim's eyes. It just paralyzes you and interferes with your chakra. I can't have you escaping before I finish, like you did last time. The traitorous Sannin ran his long dark tongue over his thin lips and leered at his prisoner. As you once knew, and I'm sure that you've been told, I live to learn new skills and discover new things. During one of my old missions, I came across the ruins of a dead civilization and I took the time to collect some writings and artifacts for further study at my personal leisure. And from my research, I discovered a seal that they had developed for the punishment of criminals. I kept this to myself, saved it for a rainy day, as some might say. Orochimaru chuckled darkly. And as you once knew, and you've surely been told since, my aspiration was to ascend to the office of Hokage. You, too, desired the position. At first, I did not see you as a serious rival. I was the favorite and most powerful student of the Sandaime Hokage, experienced, successful, and well above any other pursuer of the post. You were a student of that oaf, Jiraiya, you were young, inexperienced, overeager, foolish.
But you began to grow strong, build a reputation, and become a threat. The Sannin's arrogant, smug demeanor congealed into something darkly angry. At first I was certain that Sarutobi-sensei would still choose me to succeed him, but he began to show you more favor than me. As much as I disliked the idea that my dear old sensei would betray me and deny my greatest dream, I had to acknowledge that the possibility existed.
So you had to be eliminated.
Smirking again, the snake-like man moved to stand directly in front of the yondaime and gently stroked his cheek.
Killing you would have been the simplest solution.
But just to kill you would be such a waste.
So I endeavored to make your end useful to my research. I made you one of my experiments.
The trapped yondaime couldn't help but recall scraps of the horrors he'd seen as he'd followed Jiraiya through Orochimaru's hidden lab on the fringes of the village. To think that he was just like some of the poor souls he'd seen there. He tried to shiver, but the paralyzing snake venom prevented it. Reading about that ancient seal that I had uncovered was intriguing. I desired to see it in action. So when you drew that mission escorting that paranoid noble back to his home in the land of rice paddies, I intercepted you before you returned to Konoha and shared some drugged water with you.
Orochimaru shook his head as he chuckled.
It was child's play to ensnare you. The Sannin reached up and carefully removed the hydeate from the yondaime's head and tossed it aside to clatter on the hard roof tiles. The whip-thin tail end of one of the serpents moved to push up the fringe of blonde bangs and bear the partial seal emblazoned there. Orochimaru traced the marks thoughtfully for a minute or so before speaking again. Unfortunately, I made a minor miscalculation and you woke up before I could finish applying the seal.
You employed the Draturation no Jutsu that made you famous and escaped me.
But I must say, my experiment wasn't a total failure.
When you stumbled back home all addled and confused, it was quite fortunate for me that you acquired that amnesia.
I greatly looked forward to studying you and your broken seal, and perhaps find a way to perfect it into something more than a very cruel execution method. The full seal was named something along the lines of the eternal torment and was designed to wipe the victim's memory, lock him in a catatonic state, and rack him with excruciating pain until his body slowly gives out and dies. Imagine, to not know who you are and know only agony, unable to scream or react in any way, until death creeps in and takes it all away. Orochimaru ran his long tongue over his mouth again, as if tasting the described torment and savoring it. Regrettably, I grew a little too aggressive in acquiring test subjects for some of my other experiments, and my extra studies were uncovered by Sarutobi-sensei. He sighed and shook his head regretfully. One of my sensei's greatest weaknesses was placing too much value on human life, a weakness I had long since rid myself of, and he drove me away.
And so my chance to study you was taken from me. Such a pity.
The dark-haired man brushed some long strands of hair from his eyes and scrutinized his captive audience for a moment.
You're probably wondering why I've come back. What I'm planning to do. I'll tell you, Minato-kun.
When I fled the village, I resolved to return and show Sarutobi-sensei the error of his decision. When that foolish old man killed himself in subduing the raging Kyuubi, I was without a target. And when you, my crippled victim, replaced the Sandaime, as I had first worried that you might, I found a new focus for vengeance.
Orochimaru sneered at him.
I cannot have this village, so I will smash it. I cannot strike out against my sensei, so I will settle for you instead. I could not have the seat of Hokage, so you will suffer. The Sannin flashed him a smile that looked almost kindly.
But don't worry, Minato-kun. I won't kill you. He produced a small ink pot and brush. I'm just going to finish what I started.
Naruto gulped hard as he sprinted after Pakken, the ninja pug that his sensei had summoned.
He and Sakura and Shikamaru were following the dog as it led them after Sasuke, who was chasing Gaara and his two siblings.
Kakashi wanted the three of them to back Sasuke up.
Why is this happening? Naruto wondered as they ran.
One moment Sasuke looked like he had been about to win against Gaara, the next it was snowing feathers and Naruto was out like a light. When Sakura woke him up, it was a different world. the exams had been replaced by war as Otonin and Sunanin clashed with Konohanin all over the stadium littered with unconscious civilians.
This was way worse than the misclassified mission to Wave.
This wasn't just his team, himself, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi risking their lives against Zabuza, Haku, and Gato and his thugs. It was his entire village against 2 other villages, 1 army against 2 other armies.
This was so much bigger.
He was worried for a lot of people, but most especially his mom.
Sure, she used to be a ninja and had taught him most of what he knew about being a ninja.
Sure, she was tough and could be really scary, especially when she was mad.
But she was his mom and she'd stopped being a ninja the day that he was born. What if she was too out of practice? What if she wasn't in good enough shape? What if she got hurt? What if she died? Gah! Naruto shook his head fiercely. I can't worry about that now. I need to focus on the mission. I need to pay attention, otherwise Sakura-chan or Shikamaru might get hurt. My job is to go help Sasuke. After that I can go back and help Mom.
Orochimaru smiled as his snakes lowered the Yondaime Hokage to the roof and uncoiled from him before vanishing in puffs of white smoke.
The blond man lay limp, his eyes half open, unfocused, and glassy.
The Sannin checked his victim's vital signs, found them to his liking, and then took a moment to study the completed seal before he stepped away.
As he had told the Yondaime, Orochimaru would not kill him. He would let his former rival live, so that he could suffer the full power of the tormenting seal. The dark-haired Sannin was most curious to see how long Namake's Minato would last against it. Taking a moment, he seated against his old sensei and the village.
Sarutobi Hiruzen had favored the wrong candidate, and then dashed his greatest student's dreams by banishing him.
Then the old man had the gall and go and martyr himself, and the village had chosen to make the mental cripple the next Hokage. It really wasn't fair. But today is my day of vengeance. For years he had worked and planned for this day. He had started up his own small village of ninja, Otogakure no Sato. He had ensnared Suna, Konoha's ally, into his plans. And now he was finally putting into play the plan he had slaved over for so long. The Yondaime Hokage had been punished. The village was beginning to be punished. And now it was time to punish a dead man. One of the techniques he had developed in his exile could raise the dead, his Edo Tensei. He would resurrect the first 3 Hokages and use them as weapons. The Shodai, Nidaime, and Sandaime would have to obey him and help destroy the village that they had founded and protected with their lives. The village would fall prey to its greatest heroes. Yes, revenge was sweet. Come to me, Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru began making the necessary hand seals. A blast of black flames slammed into Sakan's and Yukon's corner of the barrier. The chakra barrier held briefly and then crumbled. The twin Otonin were quickly incinerated. With one corner destroyed, the entire barrier wavered and collapsed. Staring beyond the lingering black flames that crackled and burned the patch of roof where the barrier had been, Orochimaru's yellow eyes widened. Itachi. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.